last time we met, we had a really good discussion on how AI is kind of bleeding into every day. That was a recording that we did in Swedish, and this time I thought I'd leverage your extensive knowledge when it comes to AI and the boardroom. I thought it might be a good starting point for you to kind of like, how come you can speak to this topic specifically? What is the work that you do together with boards?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I'm a principal with KPMG, and as part of my role, I was elected to the board of KPMG in our US firm and our regional Americas firm for 5 years as a standard term, if you will. And I rolled that off a little bit more than a year ago. So I happened to be on that board at the time when the generative AI sort of revolution really happened. And I was just looking back to it. It's almost exactly 3 years to the day when most of our clients and corporations sort of woke up and started asking questions about this. And so March 23, when ChatGPT moved to the GPT-4 model, I think
Mm.
was really when our clients woke up, if you will. And we had a period there of, I mentioned it on the previous podcast, where in 8 or 9 months we had many hundreds of clients reach out, and actually a large share, I would say a majority of them, said something to the effect that our board is on our back. Our board is
Yeah.
asking questions around what are we doing with this technology. Every board member and every management member had tried it on their iPhone or had somebody teach them how to use it on the iPhone, and they were blown away. That was really one of those rare moments where boards were really pushing management to explore this. I thought that was interesting to be on the board at that time.
And you've been on
I
doing
was also
transformation work for 30 years. Can you remember a time where the board has been as pushy to get a transformation started as this time?
No, I can't, and it was quite unexpected. I think most professional services providers found that there was a quite different uh, demand, if you will,
Mm.
and not all of it, but a lot of it came from the initial reaction from board members. And a lot of that reaction had to do with are we piloting? What are we doing?
Mm.
We fear of missing out, I think, was a big driver.
Mm.
But it didn't go very long until the next question came. So my board is now asking me to slow down because we
Yeah.
are concerned with
Compliance
governance
issues.
and
Yeah,
risk.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think there was more than a year of sort of like full throttle and full brakes
Yeah.
every back and forth, right? And I think that both of those aspects are great. So from a being on the board, and I was at the time also leading our go-to-market efforts for AI in the US and how we are helping our clients. I could see it both from the management's perspective and from the board perspective.
Mm.
So it was really an unprecedented time in that sense. And we also made some very big decisions back then that were a little bit early. So we changed our corporate structure. We created a new role called essentially the chief AI officer, and
Mm.
took one of our most senior leaders out of a very big revenue role and to drive this transformation. Luckily, we had already a committee, the operations and technology committee, that I happened to chair at the time. So we had a little bit more of a structural advantage to be able to handle some of the time required, both in the full board and the committee, et cetera. So there were a lot of things going on there that
Mm.
really, and most importantly, we felt that we needed training as a full board. And therefore, we developed our internal training. We have the 6 hour, 3 hour, 1 hour sessions that we did for ourselves that we are now, taking to our clients.
And how many boards have you trained in general when it comes to board work? Because I know that you do a lot of board work, and specifically now on AI.
I mean, trained is a big word, but I've interacted with more than 1,000 board members on the topic of AI in the last year, or at least 2 years.
Mm.
And that goes from one-on-one coaching sessions with clients or other stakeholders. It goes to one-on-many board sessions where we get called in to talk about the trends and how to think about that, and even all the way up to large webinars, etc. I did
Mm.
one with Eric Brynjolfsson that you also had on your podcast earlier, and we talked specifically for an hour with 1,000 board members, dialing or at least on the virtual line
Mm.
about the topics of AI and how you can think about that. So yeah, it's been a number of discussions. I caution anyone to say that they're an expert on anything to do with AI, given how quickly it evolves. And I certainly don't sort of tend to be that. But I have learned a lot, and I have a lot of thoughts around what seems to be working and not working from a board perspective.
Fantastic, and I completely agree with the fallacy of trying to be an AI expert. It doesn't seem to matter how much you try to keep up. You're always going to be behind with the speed of change, right? Um, I'm wondering, could you give us some type of state of the union for how mature is the average board when it comes to understanding the fundamental changes that AI introduces into our business?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, there's obviously a wide spectrum. Wide spectrum, yeah, that depends on a lot of things like uh, you know, the the original composition of the board. So remember, I mean, ChatGPT is already, or generative AI and now agentic AI, etc., has been around for less than 3 years, right?
Mm,
In sort of a corporate sense. So most board members were already elected to the board before.
yeah.
There's an increasing number of board members that were elected to increase the level of competence and AI savviness of the board. But most boards are governing this with their board that was elected before this
It
happened.
must be a very difficult, like, recruiting task for boards as well to even find relevant new team members to hire because it's so new to
Yeah,
all of us, right?
I see two types of approaches there. The first one, the more sort of reactive one, is that get somebody on the board that has technical competence, that has
Mm-hmm.
built something with AI,
Mm,
that understands what AI can do and the limitations around, etc. And
mm-hmm.
I think that certainly has value. I sort of lean more towards the second category that says, let's have people on the board that understand how significant disruptive technologies can impact companies and the world around them, and how the work of the board needs to evolve and focus in that world.
Mm-hmm.
So people that have been part of major digital transformations, have seen technology innovation driven growth or disruption. I tend to look a lot towards valuing that type of competence when looking for new board members.
Yeah, higher than specific AI technology skills. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you meet a new board, what are the way that you'd introduce how their function as a board changes, needs to adapt as a consequence of AI?
I think there are five topics that every board to some with some changes are dealing with at any given time. The first one is just understanding these technology trends because they're moving so quickly. Not so much exactly how the AI is built, but what AI can do and what
Yeah.
implications that can have for the company. And in these 3 years, we've had several iterations of that. So it's not, it started with generative AI, and then we had the co-pilots, and we had
Mm,
embedded software, and then we had agents, agentic system. Now it's swarms and physical AI
mm,
and AGI and SGI and all these acronyms, right? So no matter how quickly you move, every 3 to 6 months, there is something else. And on top of that, the technology itself is doubling in price performance every 3 to 6 months or so.
mm,
So whatever you thought you were dealing with a year ago is now significantly more powerful and potentially
mm,
helpful, and also potentially more risky. So that's sort of first one around understanding the trends. I think every board kind of feels they have some degree of, but it's very varied in the board. And I recommend having a dialogue around it to level set so that all of the board members are feeling that they are on the right pace there.
I would imagine that most boards have, or board members have heard about all of these terminologies. Agentic, I think, is a brilliant question or example. But there's this sense of, yes, I've heard the hype, but I haven't really seen it yet in its full implementation or in my industry, and how to kind of separate hype from reality and what
Yeah,
we should push for or move towards. How do you hold that discussion in a good
yeah,
sense in a board?
yeah. The first indication of maturity is whether the boards ask for use cases.
Mhm.
There's a little bit of a personal bent. The more they ask for use cases to make it real, to make it credible, the less mature they are.
Oh, okay.
The more mature boards focus more on the haystack, how big it is, how quickly it's moving, than the individual needles, if you will.
That's a
and
little
they're
bit
asking.
counterintuitive. I would imagine, like, it's a signal of interest asking for use cases.
It is, but early interest, right?
Ah,
So,
okay.
because the next level question becomes, well, if this is a practical thing that some person can save some time with, is that relevant for the board or not?
Mm,
Does it really move the needle on revenue or cost or risk or ability to maneuver in the market or the market around us? If
mm,
no, it's not a board topic, right?
yeah.
If it could disrupt our entire business model, if what others can do and what we can do, then it certainly is an urgent sort of board topic, if you will. So
Mm,
that's one level of maturity, if you will. The more implication questions, the more bigger questions around not only productivity, but also growth, innovation, quality, and changes in business models and market around. I think the most advanced boards are also asking, we are only one of many players in our ecosystem.
mm,
What is going to happen if every one of our customers, competitors, suppliers, regulators, etc., if they are adopting AI at the same or even faster pace, right?
yeah.
This outward looking, I think, is an indicator of the more mature boards right now that are thinking ahead,
Mm,
if you will. There's also this balance between risk and opportunity, and the nature of the board is typically risk minimizing in many
mm,
cases.
yeah.
I always encourage and look for boards that what means at least spend equal time thinking about how could we use this in our offense? How could we disrupt somebody else, right? How can we
Mm.
grow? In addition to how can we drive productivity and how can we defend against both lawsuits and brand infringements and all that stuff, right? So this balanced view, if you will, I think is indication of the more mature boards.
It's interesting because I would imagine that it can be quite a difficult conversation to have in a board. So one part of it is, do we dare to fundamentally challenge the underlying assumption of our business model? So I think there are, to your point of what happens if all of our customers, all of our regulators, like our whole ecosystem adopts these tools. So if I were to be in recruitment, for example, I would look into the recruiting process and really look for what fundamentally is the value that only a human can bring, and how much would probably all of our customers be able to do themselves that used to be the value drivers that we could deliver and charge a premium for. And like, do we dare to have a truthful discussion around the kind of next level consequences of AI bleeding in, right? I don't think that many companies would need an HR specialist externally to write their, job descriptions. Something that they might pay for previously, but now it's just available in a chat model. So one thing is like the courage of really looking into what fundamentally changes and dare to speak those things. And the second part is, how quickly do we feel that we should push for this change? Because you also have, like, we do have our current market that is still willing to pay for our old services.
Right.
And this is interesting for all transformation. How quickly
Yeah.
should we force a pivot into where we think the market will be in 3 years,
Right.
perhaps?
And this, puts the spotlight on one of the biggest challenges of being on the board versus being in the management. The board is not the management.
Mm,
The board's role is not to take the decisions, recommend, you know, uh, direct in that sense. The board provides governance and oversight.
mm,
It oversees the management's decisions, and at the end of the day, has the ultimate responsibility of hiring and firing the chief executive officer, etc., in line with that. It also, approves major decision. You literally had to vote on some of the bigger decisions, but a lot of the discussion is board on the board is about asking the right question, making sure in our oversight that management has considered many of those aspects. And
mm,
if management has considered those aspects and came to something that you might personally disagree with, that's not your role as a board member to
mm,
opinionate on. It's the process that leads you to their, to reflect the shareholders, longer term value, if you will. So particularly in those topics, it's if you have old consultants or managers like me on the board, you have to unlearn
mm,
the recommendation and
yeah.
direction skill and relearn the listening and asking the right questions skill. And particularly around those business model questions and the bigger questions that comes into light a lot. There's nothing more sensitive to a strong CEO than the board leaning in too much hands-on, right? At the
Yeah,
same
sure.
time, there's nothing more risky for the shareholders than a board that doesn't lean in at all and stays too far, away from challenging or probing and asking the right question.
How do you find the right balance in practice on those?
With difficulty, I have to say.
Yeah.
And it's both in your board training and in your experience as a board member, you get pretty clear signals when others' opinion is that you are wearing too far away from being hands-on or being too hands-on, if you will.
Mm,
It's also the role of the chairman or the lead director to direct the dialogue and manage the dialogue in such a way that we stay within those lanes. But it is, by definition, somewhat of a gray zone.
mm,
And that gray zone is where a lot of the risk and a lot of the value is. So I think the mature boards will both have experience in dealing with it and also have some generosity in somewhat passionate board members or management members
mm,
going a little bit astray and then bringing them back in because those outlier voices can be really, really critical, particularly I mean, the importance of governance, and particularly strategic governance, long-term governance, increases the more uncertainty there is,
mm.
the more rapid development there is, and the more upside or downside there is of getting it right, which is certainly ingredients that are there in the world of AI.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like such a important moment. I reflect already because I'm too young to really feel that I was part of the digital revolution, even though, of course, I've been in the kind of digital space in my whole career. But this is the first time where I feel that I'm in a management position through a big technological leap, and it really feels like one of those pivotal moments where my kids will ask, in 10,
Right.
15
What did
years,
you
what did you
do?
do? Yeah, exactly.
Understanding those trends and what it means from a board is really critical. I think the second topic that both most boards deal with is how big is the opportunity?
Mm,
And I always like to talk about that second because most boards naturally go to how big is the risk.
yeah,
The way the brain works also, and we talked about it in the last episode, is maybe that you're more sensitive to risk than
yeah.
opportunity. You're more sensitive to loss than gain. And therefore, humans, and all board members are human, need to, in my view, push ourselves a little bit towards looking for the opportunity as much as the risk. That
Mm,
that is within our mandate, and that could be debated. And I think a lot of my board colleagues might favor more the risk side, but that's also the composition of the board should favor a blend of more opportunity focused people. And on the opportunity side with AI, we've always struggled with this inability to quantify the opportunity,
yeah, because
right?
it's
3 years
hypothetically
ago,
endless, but it's also very hypothetically endless.
yes, and there is certainly enough confusion and difference of voice in the market and the different reports around how, everything from how world changing it is to how it's not happened and how
Mm,
it's overblown, etc. And any board member with, takes the input from the market would rightly be confused. What is
mm,
it? What is it for our company
yeah.
today? What could it be? What's holding it back? So this ability to quantify the opportunity that's real today, let alone could be real tomorrow, is important.
Do you have
And
some
also the nature
frameworks
of
to
that.
introduce? Like, how would you go about to the average board to start quantifying this?
So there are at least 4 or 5 different components to the value equation. The most tangible and easy to measure, at least estimate, is the labor productivity. So
Yeah,
basic time freed up, um, reinvested in the business. How much is that? So it's a time
yeah,
perspective. I often talk with board members about think about generative AI in its early instances as a time machine, not
yeah.
bringing you backwards or forwards, but creating more time. Just as you
Mm,
create more investment budget, you create time that can be reinvested. It is not really a good tool to do headcount reduction, and this is the first fallacy. I think if you're dead bent on using that productivity for headcount reduction, you will only be able to, in our experience, to get a very small share of the full potential. The big potential comes from reinvesting time into the business to do other things, drive
mm,
growth, innovation, time to market, quality of the processes, even employee satisfaction, and so forth.
mm.
And for that, there are tools. We have some, others have others, to quantify that, if you will. And that's just a portion of the opportunity. But that opportunity in itself, at least theoretically, is very significant. We estimate the white papers we put out between 4 and 18% of EPTA potential for the time freed up, reinvested in the business, considering the salary cost of an hour, depending on
Mm.
where you sit in the world, would function as a measure of economic opportunity. There are a lot of ifs around the way,
Mhm.
and most companies there are still in the making the tools available with some training and some type of incentives. Many of them, in my view, too negative and sort of forceful, but ways to stimulate that. And we are seeing in pockets of the world, some companies, some parts of companies really getting that.
Mm.
And in many right now, they're struggling with sort of realizing that benefit. But
Yeah.
to give you some examples, we've measured this ability for 30 companies that employ 100,000 people in 100 companies. And at least in portions of those companies, we're seeing replicable 22% productivity, 54% quality improvement in the
Yeah.
work that they're doing, and 44% employee satisfaction uplift.
Mhm.
So,
Huge
it's
numbers.
early days,
Yeah.
but it gives comfort that when done well, you can rely on those, and that's from basic tool usage.
Yeah.
Some kind of GPT model, Copilot model, and simpler task agents, like not the fancy future AI, etc.
You need to have a conscious thought around the reinvesting of the time into something
Yes,
even higher value. I think that's a piece, at least to me, more looking at it from the management team perspective, that we many management teams doesn't really have an idea of what do we reinvest it towards. It's more like we're looking
exactly.
to save up time.
Yeah, and this goes into the sort of like, how you reinvest that time depends on your corporate strategy.
Yeah.
What are you trying to do? Where are you trying to grow? And how could that evolve? Right. So if you
Mm.
don't have a corporate strategy, you don't know where to reinvest it. And if you
Mm.
don't have a deliberate transformation effort that encourages people to invest in the direction of the company, they will invest that in things that they think are the most helpful to them and or the company.
Mm.
Not always the same.
No, exactly.
So, but both the approach to which companies unlock this usage, the adoption, which is the biggest barrier in my view right now, and using proven behavioral science approaches, not top-down force and shame and blame, which doesn't seem to be working, is a prerequisite. But then, so from a board perspective, you ask simple questions like, okay, where are we? What share of our employees have access to a decent model, right? And
Mm.
how much are they using them? And it's not enough to have you ever used or are you using monthly? I think right
Mm.
now you should be measuring what is your daily or frequent use
Yeah, absolutely.
to get any impact, right? But then, okay, how are we guiding that organization to reinvest? What do we want to achieve? Do we want to grow more? Do we want
Mm.
to increase our margin? What are we doing with it? And there you quickly get into management questions, right? So you need to be careful as a board member not to get too nitty gritty and into it, but that high level question on where are we on the adoption journey to get labor productivity.
So for me, again, looking at it more from the operator's lens, when I meet a company that says, "Yeah, we have Copilot license," my like gut reaction is, "Great, you've gotten absolutely almost nowhere." Because you're at model levels that aren't really the latest versions, and you probably haven't done that many advanced, new, cool things with it.
I get that question a lot, and I think every 3 months the answer may change what your preferred,
Mm.
highest performing model is. Yeah, and that will continue to change. So from a board level perspective, I think it's less that than sort of what is the age of the model, right?
Mm.
Because there's also risk here. If you give employees something that's older than 1 or 2 generations back, they
Yeah.
will use their private
Yeah,
model
exactly.
anyway, and that
Yeah.
creates not only that creates risk and lack of transparency. So, the maturity, the age of the models, how many have access to a later model, etc. I think is a great indicator of providing the right tools. But even more, the models already 3 years ago were good enough for board members to wake up, right, and
Mm.
think about it.
Yeah.
So any model that's out on the market today is capable of getting you those numbers, right? 20-ish
Mm.
percent time, even almost without any data or invest because of the basic grunt work of knowledge workers that are reading, writing,
Yeah.
synthesizing, right? So,
Mm.
so I think that potential is clearly there, and the boards need to at least ensure that management is going after that with sufficient, vengeance. But beyond that, it's what you do with that. We're in the period of Stanley Cup here, and I used to play ice hockey. So I tried to explain to a Canadian CFO and board member how to think about this, and it's more like, you know, would you rather try to score the same number of goals with 4 players against a team of 5, or would you constantly want to be in power play and have one more player on the
Yeah,
ice
yeah.
without taking goal? And
Yeah,
everyone gets it right. Yes, I'd like to be constant, and that's what AI can do. If
yeah.
you are the first to get an extra player on the ice, then you have an advantage that you can
I
leverage.
love that
So
analogy because
that's
that's exactly it. I've been struggling for a good analogy to kind of exemplify the compounding, like, advantage that the AI gets you if you get into it early enough.
yeah,
I see on clients that I
it's
advise that we started the work with a year ago, like what they do versus the clients that I begin with now, and the amount of operators within these companies that truly make completely new things, because it takes the time in the company culture to
yeah,
really understand the potential of where our market is going, how this fits into it, how we practically build things, and like over a year you can make massive difference within a company. But if you have a company,
absolutely.
so even though it's like fast, which is interesting, you can say, yeah, they're only a year ahead. But like that year, it's hard to catch back up to a competitor who has a year's head start on you, because they will
Yeah,
continually have that year's head start.
exactly. And then if you play the likeness forward, right? That player, the extra player on the ice, doubles in performance every 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, exactly.
You still have to pass the puck, right,
Yeah.
between the current team and them,
Mm,
but you want a few of them, and you want more of
mm,
them on your side than on their side, right? So
mm,
it's a lot of that going into it. So you got to
mm.
find, ways to think about that. But again, that is the lower bound of the opportunity, and that is big enough for most boards to approve the level of investments that we see. So
Yeah.
we're measuring intent to invest every quarter, right? And now it's somewhere between 100 and 200 million per year for large Fortune 1000 or 500 companies,
Can you
if
put
you
that
will.
into a
That's
percentage number? Because I do think that would be valuable for the average board member. Like, what does a
yeah,
significant or like a realistically good AI investment? Where does the money
yeah.
go? Is it only to tech vendors, or how much is training and other stuff? And how much of share of revenue would the investment be, would you say?
This is usually intent, if you will. And in the big scheme of things, that's sizable to matter, but not earth-shaking. Most companies didn't plan a budget for AI,
Yeah.
1 or 2 years ago. They took it mostly from the IT budget,
Mm,
and now they have, and they redistribute the investments the way they see it fit. So it's not yet sort of, bet the firm type of things for most user companies. I'm not
mm.
talking about the
No,
builder
of course, the
companies like
foundation model
NVIDIA's
builders,
of the
no.
world, right? My personal guidance is, if you look at the quantifiable lower end of the opportunity, take that labor productivity opportunity, right? And let's say that equivalent to 4 to 18% of EBITDA, half of that probably requires more advanced agents than we have today. So you're down to 2 to 9. And about a third of that is the more low hanging fruit that you can certainly go after with existing technology. So,
Mm,
you're looking at a 1, 2, 3, 4% annual EBITDA potential for most companies.
mm,
Varies by, function, etc. But whatever that number is for you, take 10 or 20% of that
mm.
and make that your budget. So if you are investing less than 10% of your annual low end productivity, you're probably underinvesting, and you're going to get that extra player on the ice slower than your competitors.
Yeah.
If you are investing more than 20, 30% of that, that could make total sense for the period you're in, but you also might be, ahead of what most is. And there are no really hard mention, but that's my personal when I look at a company's transformation or when talk to board members, I ask them to kind of think that way, and it's very rude and rudimentary, but I believe it's accurate
And how
or
diligent
directionally.
should you be with, business cases, return on investment scenarios? Because it's also a transformation that you kind of have to invest into a little bit speculatively, because a lot of the
Yeah.
innovations that you'll end up finding won't be the ones that you expected to find, I would assume.
I mean, the ROI is really, really difficult right now. I mean, let alone the R, the returns, right, that we just talked about. And the I, the investment depends a lot on how you do it. And as you said, what is your starting position? Do you need to completely revamp your IT infrastructure, get access to models, data,
Mm,
etc.? Or have you done a lot of that? Do you have all your data in your data cloud? Have you invested in getting some of the latest models, etc.? And then the biggest part is change management.
yeah.
The effort it will take to drive that adoption is usually underestimated because board members and management and everyone immediately adopted ChatGPT on their phone.
Mm,
And we expected that the worker would do the same in the process of work. And that has not happened or isn't happening at the same pace for many, in hindsight, explainable reasons that have to do with behavioral change and so forth that we talked about on the previous episode. So change management, and you and I both talked to Professor Brynjolfsson at Stanford, and
mm,
he has proven in previous transitions that there are somewhere between, I don't know, $1 and $9 of services and change that needs to go into every dollar of technology and
yeah.
product, if you will, to get the benefit, if you will. Could be different for AI, but in that order. So I think those investments are very important to include in it. But when it comes to ROI, the honest answer is it's premature to expect management to build a very solid, defendable ROI case for the full transformation.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that to get a lot of the management out of the pressure of the board, but it's also very counterproductive for any board to ask for unrealistic accuracy and detail that takes a lot of effort from management and essentially forces them to make a lot of assumptions that may or may not be right.
Mm,
So far, most boards have and most management teams have largely felt comfortable approving the type of investments that have been done so far, largely out of strategic intent. Some would
mm,
say fear of missing out,
mm,
obvious point use cases that indicate the larger potential, and the sense that there might be an opportunity or a risk to that needs to be captured.
yeah.
When we move into the next 3 years of investments, that investment can go up, and it makes it more important. But I would ask for sort of a balanced scorecard of what do we expect the outcome to be, and the magnitude of investments. What do we expect in productivity? What could be some reasonable expectations on time to market, process improvement,
Mm,
quality, etc., that are part of our strategy? And maybe the goals already exist there, but this will make it easier to get to there. And then who are we trying to convince? Are we convincing the shareholders? Are we convincing the board? Are we convincing
mm.
ourselves? Are we convincing the employees? A lot of dialogue is around assuming that somebody else wants this
Yeah.
and that they need to do their work. And it's largely true, but it's also becomes a little bit of a circular argument. I can't count the number of times where you're on the both sides. Management says the board needs this number, right? And then you
Yeah.
sit on the board and it's like, that's not what we asked for. We asked for, a dialogue around, how are we thinking about value creation? Where are
Yeah.
we? What are the uncertainties? What's the magnitude of upside, downside, that type of thing, right?
Yeah, I think one thing
So
that I'm missing a lot is like it's so easy to default down to the kind of productivity number or
yeah,
the increase in EBITDA number or reduction in headcount number. Whereas I find in a lot of the work that I do at Grail is finding new opportunities. Because the way that I look at it is like the productivity thing, you need to do that, but everyone's going to do that. So it's just going to be a new price floor in the market, and it's going to be priced in between now and 3 years from now, depending on your market. What's And that's not really a new and improved competitive positioning, because it's just gonna be equal for everyone. But what's really
Well,
interesting in
just to reflect on that one, you just defined the most common way to differentiate and create value in the history of boards. So I wouldn't undermine that, the value of that, 'cause that could be enough, but obviously the potential could be even bigger where you're going.
So I have this triangle that I work with my clients on, which is let's look at any business process from speed, quality, and cost. And everybody seems to look at speed and quality, which is how can we do our existing jobs faster? And for me, it's all about the quality. Like, what is fundamentally new? What is a and we both have a relationship with the lovable guys, right? And I think they were the ones that made this click for me. That previously in the market of software engineering, what used to be the squeeze point was the access and the cost of engineers. What happens to this market if that's not a limiting factor anymore? Like, what does that
Right,
unlock? And I think for any business process innovation, that is fundamentally the question that I try to get to. Is there something that used to be a squeeze point or a high
yeah,
cost center that all of a sudden isn't, and what becomes possible as a consequence of that not
right.
existing anymore?
Yeah, that's super interesting. So I would say, the most mature boards and management teams, they spend at least some degree of significant point of discussion on that topic,
Mm,
right? And we are seeing examples where when you re-engineer the process almost from scratch, but with the people that do the process today, part of the journey,
yeah.
not as a victim of or a defender of, if you will,
Mm, mm,
that you can get some pretty dramatic results. And one concrete example, we were working with, with a telco in Europe, and they had an offshore finance ops center in another country, if you will. And the task was to improve productivity by 30%. But by redesigning the process, that work could be automated to 100% and
yeah.
move back to the home.
Mm,
But that required a fundamental rethink of the work. And there's one sort of intellectually very stimulating point that if you think about the notion of productivity in the history of humankind, other than capex, it has to do with reducing the number of hours of labor that goes into a process,
yeah.
since labor is still a significant portion of most companies. Not the only one, you can cut other costs, etc. But literally, that's been at the core. How do we do this with less people, less hours? If the marginal cost of a AI agentic hour equivalent token um, goes to marginal cost of zero or the
Yeah.
cost of compute energy, you will find that there are types of work where you can double or triple the amount of work, but dramatically reduce the cost of that work.
Yeah.
So by increasing the amount of work, you get more productivity. And that is so counterintuitive for most companies, boards, and human beings, if you
Mm,
will.
yeah.
And it
Absolutely.
requires that process redesign. So there are essentially, I think, two schools of thought of companies and boards. Like you have, I would call it sort of the here and now people that are, skeptical naturally to all that future potential, and they just want to see enough credible productivity to justify the investment, and then we'll see,
Yeah.
right? Lot of value in that opportunity. And then there are those that say, well, that will not get us anywhere, right? We need to completely blow up and re-engineer some parts of our organization or the way we do things, right? And we need a board on board to do that. And then and only then will we see the full benefits. So we're not interested in that daily productivity grind. We're just looking at this disruption of. And they also have a merit, less proven yet, but in my view, the right answer is do both, right?
Yeah.
Do you have a portfolio of initiatives and questions and strategies that help you tap into, those different types of value creation? It's
Mm,
very risky to only bet on one.
yeah. I agree.
Uh, and to some degree, you can do it with the same resources and level of investments and tools. And in some cases, you need to dedicate to different ways of doing it. But yeah, no, the topic of value or ROI for board is one of the most difficult ones right now. And having said that, when you do see all these surveys, right, everyone says that, concern about ROI or ability to measure that is a top concern for every company and every board. But you're also seeing that at least in our surveys, and the recent one is just coming out now this month, the intent to invest
Mm.
still goes up.
Yeah.
So there's this, which means increasing frustration and not being at ease in board and management, but yet seeing the need or the desire to continue that go up. So it's a very interesting period of time right now.
You do a lot of surveys at KPMG towards the boards. What are more of the kind of top concerns of the board?
Yeah, so as the list we started on, right, the tech trends, the value, second one. The third one are the risks.
Mm.
Uh, the fourth one is how do you translate opportunity and risk into strategy and transformation?
Hmm.
And then finally, how does it affect the work of the board? Those five sort of trends, opportunities, risk, strategy, transformation, and work of the board are the top five topics that for every board I've interacted with to some degree. When we get a question from a client or somebody on the market, it is usually either a risk question, come and talk to us about this. And when you ask those five questions, are you interested in this? Almost all of them say yes to all five.
Yeah.
Second most common is to have a discussion about just tech trend, etc. But
Mm.
then you go through the full thing. But in the feedback afterwards, the part of that that's most highly valued is the last one, which is the work of the board that we can come to later. But those five topics are
Yeah, we're for sure
extremely
coming
core.
there. I'd like to double
Yeah,
click on the risk section before
yeah,
we do, because
absolutely.
risk to me has been I understand why it's there, and it's good that it's there. And risk when it comes to AI, at least to my experience, is very misunderstood and built on kind of legacy ideas of what is how does these models work. And I feel it's almost a little bit cartoony. Can my competitor now Google whatever I chat with in my chat model? And the risk is both way bigger and but also elsewhere. Like, how would you structure a risk discussion with a
Yeah.
board?
No, you have to tailor it carefully to the industry and the nature of people. But right now, as I said, the three hot topics in that risk bucket or trusted AI bucket, as we call it, are sort of governance and compliance, cybersecurity,
Mm.
and shadow AI. So on governance compliance, most companies by now have some degree of framework, procedures they've gone through, they've gotten advice on, or they're following some of the recommendations around, how to set yourself up to do that. And that's important. Compliance is almost the same. My colleagues would not agree, but related at least. That you need to speculate what the risk is for you to not be in compliance with regulatory requirements that are, in some cases, clear, in some cases, not clear,
Mm.
or intellectual property, the evolution of
Yeah.
lawsuits on intellectual property, etc. So
Mm.
but most companies have departments, have skills, have people that are good at that risk management, not perhaps the AI generated risks yet, but there's a place to land it. And
Mm.
it's an ongoing discussion. I think in that topic, one of the reflections I've seen come up more than once is um, at some point, many companies separated the overall enterprise risk that you always publish in your annual report that you have to do with adding a new AI risk. And it was a
Mm.
very convenient way to handle the AI risk.
Mm.
But you also realize very quickly that all of your traditional risks are impacted by AI,
Yeah.
and you kind of need to rewrite, all of them in light of AI, right? Which
Mm.
takes more work, time, if you will. So that's on the governance compliance risk. On cybersecurity, it was very important before Gen AI and the acceleration on agentic AI, and it continues to be exponentially more important for the very reason that even if you don't do anything with AI yourself, the bad guys out there are very savvy AI users,
Yeah.
and they will get that productivity and quality. So you will get more attacks and more effective attacks the more potent the models are. And
Mm.
again, they're doubling in price performance every 3 to 6 months. So the threat to some extent is very rapidly increasing. So far, and this is not my opinion, but opinion of somebody I won't name that used to be in the FBI. when you look at least on the US side, the nature of those risks, it's more about a bad hacker becoming average or good
Mm.
than that the best hacker becoming dramatically more effective.
So that would
Both
translate into
will happen.
more attacks rather than the sophistication of the attacks
For now,
for now.
at least that is a perception of one expert that I've found, credible. I don't have
Mm,
data on that, but it may not be true tomorrow, right? So you
mm,
need to kind of think about both, if you will. And
mm,
that's if you do nothing, right? If you
mm.
do something, which you will force to do if you want to be on this journey, you will also open up more attack vectors. So it's almost impossible to kind of like stay on that. You need to constantly, as a board member, try to ask and ascertain not only where are we today, but what is our plan to increase our level of defense or handle the risk that are there. Because it's also, risk is part of the business model. What is
Yeah,
the level of risk that you are willing and able to accept for certain outcomes, right? And
yeah.
there are whole industries like that depend on the ability to price that risk, right? But most other companies are not always thinking about that. So that cyber is a huge and growing part of the agenda.
Where you can get a lot of
And
help
finally,
from AI though. Like
yeah,
Anthropic, for example, has a
yeah,
brilliant suite of kind of security skills and so forth. And we saw a lot
yeah.
of
If you
market
if you
movements.
deploy them,
Yeah, if you
right?
deploy them, yeah, sure.
Yeah. So the opportunity for the attackers goes up. Your opportunity to defend goes up.
Mm,
So you
yeah,
have this arms
exactly.
race to some extent,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Which makes it an evergreen topic, further accentuated by AI.
Mm,
Most companies have focused on cybersecurity. They may not have enough or update it frequently. I would, I would reflect on whether once per year is enough for a board these days to have this dialogue. Right? I would opt towards more of a frequent review. And then thirdly, shadow AI. So essentially, what your employees do with their private AI tools at work
yeah.
or as part of their work. Yeah, it is unfortunately a very common phenomenon, risk, both because companies have not yet provided them with, a strong enough model, if you will, and because they
Often
personally
under
feel,
the kind of shadow argument of risk, which is a
yes,
fantastic, funny
exactly,
coincidence. Yeah,
it's irrational.
yeah,
Yeah, so I would say one of the biggest risks right now is not having your employees on your
yeah.
controlled platforms,
Mm,
if you will. And there's a lot of mostly survey-based input on that. We have asked 40,000 people around what they actually do behind closed doors and it's quite scary, right? Or it
mm,
could be quite risky.
mm.
But it also indicates the productivity they feel from using. They wouldn't be doing that if they
Mm,
didn't feel that it was
yeah,
relevant for their work.
yeah.
So the people that question the ROI also have to explain that in light of how could both be true.
Yeah, there's something
So
broken
those
in
would
that
be the
equation that we seem to struggle with adoption at the same time that we have a lot of shadow usage.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not always the same person. It's not always for the same purpose.
Mm.
And there are a lot of drivers that you can affect there. But looking at it as part of your adoption strategy, you get the double benefit of reducing or managing your risk.
Yeah,
There
and
are many
I
other
would
risks.
bring in also the kind of talent risk into this equation as well. I have a
Yeah,
lot of conversations with people my age, high achievers that are working at companies that are AI laggards that are saying, I take too big of a career risk staying here because this is
yeah,
obviously going to shape the next coming X years. And if I'm not hitting the ground for running, I need to get out of wherever I'm working currently. And that's a huge risk if you start
yeah.
to having a brain drain from your company as a consequence of a too scared AI policy.
Absolutely. And on the other end of that same spectrum, you have people saying, I'm actually nervous to use these tools because if I rely on them, I may be held accountable for some error that my boss will fire me for.
Mhm,
So I'm
mm,
better off being less productive, but knowing that I'm equally, even
mm,
if I were more productive and better with the model, at least. So the trust is a key component across all of this. And
yeah,
what binds it together is I think that the best boards and companies, they see trust not as as a break or something that slows down transformation. But we like to say that no company can transform faster than the pace of trust.
Mm.
The pace of trust that their employees have in the company, their job, and the tools. Customers have in their use of their data. Regulators have in their following regulation.
Mm.
Investors in deploying this in a prudent way. So the best way I feel is to look at trust as an accelerator, not a decelerator. In
Yeah.
that, it takes a little bit of mind work to get.
Can we discuss the kind of investors to the board touch point as well? Because
Yeah,
from the investor perspective, obviously, and a company valuation perspective, we see a lot of companies kind of scrambling for really the answer to the simple questions: are we winners or losers as a consequence of AI? And I've had in kind of behind closed doors a lot of discussions with CEOs saying more or less that I've kind of bullshitted my way through this answer, but now I really need an answer to the question. So how much pressure are boards facing from their investors? I know they're composed from the investors a lot of the time, but
yeah.
can you, my experience at the board level, how this actually works, is very limited. Can you talk me through how this would
Yeah.
kind of play out?
I mean, that varies enormously depending on the maturity in the company industry. So there's almost not a single answer that's right. But I'll talk about some of the extremes. I think at the most basic early stage company in the industry that's not going through the most dramatic, right? There's more of a, you know, let's let's not get ahead of our skis and overinvest type
Mm.
of sentiment from investors, right?
Okay.
Show me the ROI.
Mm.
Yes, this may happen over time, etc. But
Mm.
let's make sure we're not last,
Yeah.
but we may not need to be first,
Hmm.
right? And that could be a very prudent strategy for some. It could be
Yeah.
a very dangerous strategy for others, right? If you go to the other extreme, you're basically your company's valuation becomes
Your AI story.
exclusively tied to the AI story,
Yeah.
right? And we've seen several companies in the tech industry being
Mm.
both able to redefine their narrative to get an AI multiple
Hmm.
and not being successful in that,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And that is, and that's a constant. And I'm not an investor, and if I was a good one, I might not be on this call here. But it's a constant struggle for any investor to keep up with the value flows and the perception of the winners and losers in that game, right? But
Yeah, and as you said, we've seen this in the tech industry very clearly with like SaaS
yeah,
multiples during February,
yeah,
specifically in March. Do you think it's feasible to think that this will hit most knowledge worker industries similarly, just that the tech industry is a little bit further ahead? Or was it like, oh, it was the big, but also the first scares, so it became
yeah.
amplified?
I think the prevailing sort of mode of thought is that exactly that, right? Tech industry is leading. It's both building and using
Yeah.
and enabling all other companies to use. And therefore, what happens in tech will happen to other companies, right?
Mm.
It's tightly coupled with where we see the most productivity. I mean, it's the number one use case for AI is coders,
Yeah.
right? And it's beyond doubt, that they are being transformed and so forth. And now the prevailing thought is that what you see to coder knowledge work will gradually happen to any knowledge work
Yeah.
and potentially even physical work with physical AI
With
in the longer
robotics and everything else. Yeah, sure.
robotics. etc. So I think there's a lot of merit to that way of thinking. The reality will be very mixed depending on where you are and who you are, etc. Right?
Mm.
To do that, but I think that's clearly the way that the most are thinking. The irony is that a lot of the biggest tech companies that are deploying and building these are so focused on building the technology that they're not themselves fully using their own technology to drive the
Mm.
more basic productivity, which is so
Yeah.
secondary to their valuation, right? It's growth, quality of their products, and whether they have a 10% more effective back office doesn't really move their
Mm.
needle, right? So they
Mm.
are focusing on the right things from their perspective. Reality is different in many other mature and slow moving. That 10% back office efficiency could be do or die
Yeah.
in that. So that's different as well. So I do think we're going to see a lot of that. Then when you hear a lot of the speculation in media and investor communities, right? You have to separate two things. One is the underlying impact on competitiveness and productivity that AI unleashes. And the other is the perception of investors of where the train is going,
Mm.
and which is somewhat decoupled from the here and now short-term value creation, right? Both are influenced. And on top of that, you now have geopolitical macro factors that can override even the biggest short-term productivity gains or losses. It becomes very, very difficult, and boards will do well to ask themselves those questions, right? Is there an underlying productivity difference here that would motivate some that? Is there a investor sentiment around winners and losers, bubbles or not? And is there a macro political driver overall? Which of those are the ones we need to care a lot about? And here's where AI and geopolitics and external market uncertainty comes into the boardroom. Usually at two different types of the agenda, but I think increasingly, being one, right, to help guide that through it.
Yeah,
So
that's
the latest discussion, of course, around all the chip manufacturers, the data center investments, and the SaaS companies, valuations that have been looked at
yeah.
and reevaluated in many ways in the
Mm.
eyes of the investor. Some would say that there is a lot of overreaction and and irrational behavior. Some would say whatever it is, it's where the train is going, and the truth
Mm.
is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. And that is probably true both for the investments racing into anything that smells AI, and the investors fleeing out of anything that smells punished by AI. That's interesting. I'm going to open up the kind of last chapter, but perhaps the most practical chapter as well, which is the inner working of the board. Like, how is that practically changed as a consequence of AI?
That's a really good question. And sort of maybe even before we go there, how the implication on that is, how does the work on strategy and transformation change? Because that
All right.
impacts how the board's work would change. And this has been a hot topic for boards for long. The board's role in strategy, governance, and oversight is a longstanding discussion, right? There are many opinions around how much ownership the board has of shaping and sort of developing the strategy versus overseeing and sort of asking for updates on the strategy. And I
Yeah.
think learned scholars will differ a little bit on what the optimal is there, but it's one of the areas I think where there's most sort of gray zone or differences between boards. And this comes to a head with AI because AI not only requires in strategy for how to deploy AI, it impacts the corporate strategy that existed before AI.
Yep.
And in many boardrooms, and we were one of them, we had a lot of debate initially around, do we need an AI strategy, or do we just need a corporate strategy influenced by many things, including AI? And
Yeah.
if you randomly pick any board member, you will find they fall clearly in one of the two camps.
Mm.
Uh, I'm personally in the camp of you need both. And I joke a little, like, does your company have an HR strategy or a vacation strategy or location strategy? Now, if you have that, then you need an AI strategy, which answers the question, how will you leverage AI to improve your company?
Mm.
Um, uh, your corporate strategy is broader than that, and it includes many drivers, not only AI, but it will be hard to see almost any company that within reasonable time has a perfect corporate strategy that goes unchanged in any way
Yeah.
with such a massive disruption. That would cause pause as me as a board member
Yeah.
if that happens. Now, strategy is all about the how. It's not, it's not the why, or is the what happens when you're there. And the how gets translated into most companies into some kind of transformation initiative,
Mm.
either a new one, your AI transformation, or a better old one, your
Yeah.
ongoing
Mm.
digital or company transformation, or even just a set of portfolio of initiatives where you change stuff in that. Whatever it is, most boards would do well to reflect on what is it, right? What do we expect from it? How does it interact with all other initiatives that we had doing? And many companies had a separate effort looking at productivity and cost reduction.
Mm.
The separate effort at AI and etc. And they have not yet merged the two,
Hmm.
which I think is a good board question, right? So you get into that, and there are many ways to articulate that strategy. But if you look at some of the clear ones, it contains some components, right? It contains something around what you will do in the market differently.
Yeah.
Where you expect to grow, what you expect to sell, how you will price that, etc. It has some component on how you will deliver your products and services differently.
Yeah.
And it has some components around how you drive your company differently. Those three things, if they're not present in your corporate/AI strategy, then boards would do well to kind of
Would you add the
uh,
fourth around changing customer expectations and behaviors?
yeah, you could. To me, that those are outcomes are embedded in the three.
Okay.
On one hand, you can try to set customer expectations by the way you price, communicate, features,
Absolutely.
etc.,
Sure.
but you don't control it.
Mm.
And the perception of customers and competitors are influenced by how others,
Mm.
try to do that as well. So it's hard to do it in isolation, if you will.
Yeah.
But it's certainly part of your strategy should include what do we think would be beneficial for our company's ability to compete now and thrive in the future.
Mm.
A very common one is pricing, right?
Yeah.
We are one of the world's biggest professional services companies. We're certainly in the middle of this
Mm-hmm.
epicenter of change, right? A lot of our revenue comes from the same companies year after year. Some are new, and usually at sort of hourly based, work input based
Yeah.
agreements that have been formed over many, many years, and often at the request of our clients and customers.
Yes.
Particularly the purchasing departments of those clients, are very good at
Yeah.
enforcing a certain way of behavior. Now, there is a clear direction to move away from that, not only in professional services, but in more other aspects towards more of an outcome-based, fixed price, ways to pay for the value, not the input that gets you the value. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
pretty clear trend, at least in perception and in communication and all aspects of that. It's not yet as clear in reality, and partly because of how companies like to buy or have been
Yeah.
trained to buy.
Mm.
And that takes longer to change, but it's certainly a capability you need to have. And you, as a board member, you need to make sure that the company kind of reflects on. I also remind people that there's a little bit of a fallacy. Like if I just jump to a fixed price or an outcome-based price, I will be able to retain some of the margin for myself.
Mm.
I won't be squeezed out by my customer, etc. And that is usually not true, or at least not directly true, because it's your ability to deliver more value and your ability to deliver that value at a faster pace or at a lower cost that enables you to set a price that maintains or increases your margin.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
It's
not
not a
the price structure
cosmetic fix on the
itself.
top. That's
Exactly. So I
yeah.
often ask, okay, we're moving to fixed pricing. Okay, at what level? Yeah, we'll
Mm.
figure it out. But how would you figure it out? Right?
Mm.
Well, we want to win in the market. Okay, but will that enable you to sustain margin, or will those margins die if you win in the market?
Yeah.
I think there is a little bit of a mental crutch to jump to that, if you will, right, on the
I
pricing side.
think because
So
I've been
those are some
working a lot
aspects.
with kind of service firms, and most of them have 60-70% of their revenue comes from some type of bread and butter
Yeah,
type of deals, where we could invest quite heavily in the efficiency of the delivery vehicle to get to that outcome,
yeah,
and then proactively price a fixed price that is lower than the market, and then get into a really sweet position where we offer something that's faster, better, and cheaper
yeah,
versus the market.
yeah,
But for this very kind of defined subset of our services, that is the high volume, high repeating business,
exactly.
and then keeping the other
So
business more hourly or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So as a board member, you want to understand, are we doing everything we can to create the flexibility for us to have different pricing strategies and
Yeah.
tactics that would win in the market? And are we using those into the way that we front customer? One of the two is not enough
Mm.
because it actually hurt you in that sense.
Yeah.
But if I end on a final sort of like we obviously we talk about our client zero story. We happily share in various waveforms how we have thought about it, good and bad. But
And for the
some
listener,
of the most
the client zero is KPMG implementing the
yes, what do we
strategy
do to
on
ourselves?
yourselves. Yeah.
Yeah,
Go
so
ahead.
we like to try things on ourselves before we tell clients what to do. Yeah, and we've learned a lot. We've done a lot of cool things, but also things that that didn't work out. But I think the most exciting things right now that are happening is thinking about the professional services portfolio of offerings and
Mhm.
the productization or potential productization of those. There's a lot of discussions around services as software, not software as service, but services as software, where some portion of the professional hours could be delivered through more of a product,
Mm.
a build, a tool, a technology, while still having all the services required to make that work. In the tech industry, that's existed for decades, right?
Yeah.
Products plus service. In the services industry, it's been service. Now
Yeah.
it becomes service and product to some extent. So one of the coolest things I think we've done is, first of all, of course, we have tried to reimagine wherever in the world we can do our work more effectively with AI and now
Mm.
agentic AI. So we built a global agent delivery platform called Workbench, where all our digital task workers and co-workers will live and breathe and
Mm.
get their energy, etc. And so in theory, if we develop a train an agent in Australia, we can deploy it in Stockholm or New York the next day while being compliant with all the
Mm.
regulatory constraints that we are heavily under, of course, as an audit firm. Second, we're building a numerous, I would say at least somewhere in the order of 9 agent factories, right? Where we will take work and try to automate portions of it as quickly as possible in sort of a mass production, facility, if you will.
And what get
Um,
a little bit more practical. What is
yeah.
an agent factory?
An agent factory is a repeatable, structured process coupled with the latest technology that then enables you to say, "Here's how we delivered a project, finance transformation project in the past. Here are
Mm.
the work steps. Here are the activities by the humans. Here's the data. Here are the frameworks and the knowledge and intellectual property we used." And then translating that into tomorrow with current technology and using all the latest, we could, deliver 30, 40, 50, 60, 70% of that human work with technology, in this case, agentic AI and AI technology, if you will, combined with our human services. Every service then has a different current point of that. Some cases it's zero, in some cases it's a lot, and it will change over time as the models get better. But the more we can do that, the more we can focus the human labor, almost uniquely human value
Yeah.
added and interesting to do. So the work gets better, right? So that's kind of like our bulk production facility for knowledge work, if you will.
And it's
But the
interesting
pace of
because
change is no
you're what? You're 150,000 something employees. You're a huge, huge company.
more than 250,000. Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
275,000
I
globally.
I
Yeah.
is this a kind of moving circus of like transformation people that are trained on like this process and the tools and how to make this a repeatable thing that moves around from Stockholm to New York to Sydney? Or is it more like we find one process in Sydney just because of serendipity of something happening in Sydney, and then we try to mass export it to all of the 250,000 or the 80,000 that would be affected by this process
Yeah,
upgrade.
it's somewhere in the middle. It's more of the second. It's a federated approach where we concentrate infrastructure investments in a finite number of places.
Mm.
Assume, US, Germany, UK, Australia, a handful of companies that are central in the region
Mm.
and that have the scale and capacity to run these factories, if you will. And then what comes out of the factory can be used by everyone.
Yeah.
So pretty much like you would think of a manufacturing plant type of approach. It's just that it's a knowledge worker factory, not a widget production factory, if you will. And
That
and
begs another
that is one.
question that I've found a lot from CEOs and especially companies where you have like regional CEOs or country managers, which is relating to how do we properly structure AI investments? Uh, because as we mentioned some time ago, there isn't typically a dedicated AI budget. There might be now for 26, but most of the time, any AI investment comes out of your own profit and loss, which then incentivizes not really the kind of build here and export to everywhere. It's a little bit. I know that we're all in the same boat, but if you want to make a investment, you'd prefer it to be some type of umbrella investment, but there isn't really.
Yeah.
Can you speak to like how you structure investments correctly?
First of all, we early on adopted the principle of innovate once, use everywhere.
Yeah.
Which sounds really good, and it is good, but it's hard to do. Um, and we also have the added complexity that, we are not one global firm. We are a network of global independent legal entities
Mm,
that operate, as independent companies under, global set of collaborative rules and
mm,
investments. We do have, of course, a vehicle to share investments globally, but hence the federated approach works really well for us. If you are a truly globally integrated company, you may need to be more centralized than that, but it also increases risk, if you will. So the investments come from all the member firms
okay.
into what they individually will do. And then there is a shared investment that goes across the global network to support those things that are truly global in nature and central, etc. Right? But it's also very important and tricky to handle the intellectual property and the
Mm,
handling of the sort that we are independent operating entities in many countries. So that's kind of like the bulk of the approach. But this is moving so quickly. So the two other strategies that I'm very excited about is that we have also taken clients into the account. So in several cases, we've gone to clients to say that we agreed to do this work manually, and we're really happy about the outcome, etc. And you can trust on that. But if you're willing to co-innovate with us, we will invest in trying to do this even better with the latest technology. And if
mm,
there is benefit, we'll split the difference. Right.
yeah.
So we've done that on a number of engagements and found really, really attractive returns on that, which has sort of spurred us on to do not only centrally planned production distribution, but already changing at the edge
Yeah.
while the factories are built out. Right. But the even more interesting thing now is our what we call our sort of asset-based portfolio, and our red teaming approach is not called that anymore. But essentially, we wanted to make sure that we're not disrupted by any one of our competitors, and
Mm,
that we leverage the full innovation power of entrepreneurs, particularly in Silicon Valley, where the center of the world is right now, and I happen to be right now. So we employed an approach where we took existing really high performing partners out of their line delivery roles, which was a huge risk, of course, because they generate a lot of our revenue.
yeah.
And a handful of them were put into startups in Silicon Valley, bringing their knowledge, data, frameworks, etc., but then became founders for 3 months
Mm,
to build a new company or a product that could disrupt themselves
yeah.
with the tech stack of the startup and the speed of the startup, etc. And the first three of those products that then succeeded are now coming onto the market, and we're deploying them to paying customers this month,
Mm,
actually. And
wow.
one of the
That's.
coolest ones is called Maestro. If anyone wants to Google it, Mystro, and essentially it's the first 5 digital KPMG employees that we will take to market. We have trained AI agents that can do sort of the 100% of a role
Mm,
that it can either be part of our change team or part of, in this case, an HR team to do opportunity assessment for AI, to
mm,
do all those things that they need to do for AI.
yeah.
So we'll see how that works, etc. But it's the first sort of fully digital co-members that we put into the market, and we are trying those right now. So those are ways that we are trying to transform ourselves, if you will. Obviously, using our trusted AI framework for everything we do, which we're very proud of, and the intellectual property that we have to try to codify that as much as possible. But this is a race. All
Mm,
the so-called big four and consulting firms, professional services firms of any kind are in this head-to-head race, and really it's about how fast you run versus. So that's a little bit of sharing public information more or less around the how we're thinking about it.
Okay, so perhaps a little bit of a tangent here, but again, speaking about the board and what should you and shouldn't you have opinions on from the board perspective. The last piece, the maestro piece, would for me beg the question of organization design for the future.
Yeah.
Uh, how do you have that conversation, or should you have that conversation at the board level?
Yeah, that's one of the, yes, but not in too much detail. I
Okay.
think the experienced board members would find ways to ask a question around how our planned organizational changes align with our AI strategy and the changes to our corporate strategy to be able to enable that.
Yeah.
And what changes have been made and are contemplated to be made around talent profiles, structure, incentives, training, all those aspects, right?
Yeah.
Getting into the nitty-gritty of what that is very much management, and making the decisions, all of that is management's role, right? But
Mm,
having that interaction, both in terms of sort of getting the benefits, but also protecting the employees and from burnout, from too much change fatigue, and being balanced in how you get the people along.
mm,
Because at the end of the day, my humble opinion, people are now the biggest both barrier and lever for growth and
mm,
opportunity capture, if you will. So it's very hard to do this to the people without having, them with you. And that's, of course, a board concern when it comes to the talent sentiment, people leaving or wanting to join or not, right, and all that stuff. So it's at the highest level, I think, yes. But it's also very uncertain, right?
mm.
It is there are many ways that you can change your organization and your talent profile. There's been a number of famous professional services companies that have publicly stated that they
Yeah.
have, gone through all their recruiting data and completely reversed
Mm,
their hiring profiles, right?
yeah.
We haven't quite seen that in reality yet, and I think somewhere in between is prudent, but it's worthwhile thinking through. Um, one of my pet things right now is that we're seeing a lot of companies pause around their early hiring
Yeah.
principles.
Absolutely.
Eric Brynjolfsson showed that canaries in the coal mine paper, right? That there are some measurable effects, but yet only for a very few number of roles.
Mm,
But the sentiment is very strong that this is happening, and having kids in college, I sense that as well. And to some extent, it's very irrational, right? You on one hand, you're struggling with the change management of people that have been in the company for much longer. And then you have this group of people that are AI native,
yeah.
right? Don't need any, right? They are cheap, and they, with the help of AI, will perform as an average member very, very, very quickly,
Yeah.
right? Or more quickly at least. So an irrational organization would be to have more of them eventually than less.
Mm,
And there's this big discussion around, a lot of job loss announcements that we are cutting our staff because of AI, et cetera. And yeah, and if you haven't been in the boardroom, that may or may not be the primary driver. But I suspect for these many companies I see is that there are that are additional and even stronger drivers of that. It's not that AI has replaced those. It's more that the investments that are required for AI or anticipated to be required for AI, people are hedging and trying to cut costs wherever they can to
mm.
prepare for that. Right now, I would say that is more true in general than job replacement, but it's certainly possible in the near term, and something that boards need to be very, very attuned to because of the pros and cons and that, if you will.
And
And
talking
that
about
maybe brings us to the
risk on the same topic, one thing that I do think that we'll in a year's time, 2 years' time, talk more about is the consequence on kind of succession planning. If you have nothing coming in from the bottom, you won't have your future middle managers that to promote, right?
yeah.
And that is a classic tension, right? Well, it's not a problem today, but it will be perhaps a problem to for tomorrow, and then okay, it's future Johan's problem,
Yeah,
right?
exactly, and it's anticipation. And I mean, just this week, there were two senior CEO transitions announced,
Mm,
where the ability to govern a company through AI was among the reasons why that change happened. Right?
Mm.
Probably
Yeah.
could have happened anyway. I don't know, but it's starting to be mentioned at least, which gonna drive that, if you will. So
Yeah, and I led a
uh,
couple of teams where we were very aggressive in terms of pivoting towards AI nativity, and what you end up finding is that you run a much leaner team, yes, but you're also way more dependent on those specific people staying. Like each player becomes a key player in a sense.
yeah,
And so that's
exactly.
another risk to kind of consider.
To consider.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you bring all that back to kind of how does that affect the work of the board, right?
Mm,
The the weekly, quarterly, etc. And again, of course, all boards are different in that sense. But first of all, if you're on a board and if you want to kind of make sure that you're talking about the top 5 topics that other boards are talking about, I offer those 5, right? The tech trends, the
mm,
opportunities, the risk, the strategy and transformation, and the work of the board itself. There are many others that you can talk about, but at least you would not be an outlier if you covered those 5
mm.
and at the high level. Now, that's a lot of work and a lot of time,
Yeah.
right? And 3 years ago, that was not the case. You had equally important things to talk about then.
Mhm,
And I actually looked up the first, or at least according to Perplexity, the fourth major paper that came around board governance for AI came
mm,
in November 23 from Harvard Business
mm,
Review.
mm.
So there's been less than 3 years of any type of guidance to board members on
Yeah.
how to be a good board and board member with this, right?
Mm,
And most board tenures are longer than that. So
mm.
essentially, the vast majority of the boards that are now dealing with this were not put together or recruited at the time. They were recruited before generative AI really hit
Yeah.
the scene. So we're all learning together again, and particularly as board and management. So a couple of things that in that topic that a lot of boards are thinking about. So first of all, it's just the mundane task of structuring agendas and allocating time, which is very nitty-gritty, but very, very important because that is the structure by which the boards operate
Yeah.
in the formal board setting, right? And if this thing with AI is now going to take more time,
What gives?
you have very few options, right?
Mm,
Either you reduce the time spent on other things, which most board members and companies do not want to do. You increase the number of hours put in by the board, which
mm,
most board members are reluctant to
mm.
do, or you increase the effectiveness of the hours spent so that you can handle this more. And one thought is then, of course, using AI to be more effective and that has been a slow evolution, if you will. It is happening. I'll come back to some of the coolest things there, but so one or two of those 3 need to give,
Yeah.
and nobody's going to be happy with the answer to that one. So it's important to have it upfront as a discussion. So when it comes to the time structure, etc., what I at least see or recommend boards to consider is that even with the same time, think about the frequency
Mm,
and context of that time. So take strategy or AI strategy or broader corporate strategy. Many companies used to have an annual offsite and they spent a day or two talking about the strategy, and that was kind of it, right?
mm.
At least consider having that discussion at a quarterly basis or even more frequently, given that the pace of changes are.
Yeah.
When we went through COVID, right, we went from quarterly in-person big meetings to sometimes weekly virtual meetings when the change was biggest.
Yeah.
Maybe some kind of that mentality in the boardroom
Mm,
could come back,
mm.
right, without overreacting and overblowing it, right? But also how you group topics on the agenda, right? Should the corporate strategy and the AI transformation be discussed on different days or different hours or
Mm,
next to each other or in the same discussion, right?
mm,
You can group topics with pros and cons, right, in that sense. And then there are topics that you should increase. And before Gen AI, there were benchmarks from many different places around what seemingly more effective boards or successful companies spend more time on. And sometimes that's self-serving or not, but usually it goes to the bigger topics, the more strategic themes, that are slightly more forward-looking
Mm.
without reducing focus. So those are some of the directions of looking at the. In many cases, I see boards at least temporarily increase the time spent
Yeah.
until they can figure it out, with nobody being happier for it.
I think
There's
one of the
also a question of
evolutions that I've found a lot in again, then in the context of management teams is how effectively can we prepare clear decisions as a consequence of using AI better in creating much better preparation for decisions, in how we handle pre-reads and transcripts in the board meetings perhaps, and running those transcripts through a set of post-processing agents that are clarifying things that we've left out that we should have discussed, where we have confirmation biases. So just the effectiveness of the idea of a governing body can be increased a lot with the technology. And I would imagine the same is true for a board, right?
it could certainly be, and that's the third area. So there's also a lot of risk and a lot of resistance to bringing AI too quickly into the boardroom for very
Mm,
natural reasons of being compliant and being minimizing risk of confidentiality, leakages, and so
mm,
forth. Right. So that is very important to consider. And anything you do in the boardroom needs to be thoroughly quality vetted and assured from many of those angles. Right. Now, most boards use a software tool to help the work of the board.
mm,
There are a number of them out there. Most big boards use one or two, if you will, and they naturally already have modules and additional functionality that uses AI to make the work of the board, the pre-reads, the questions, etc.,
mm,
easier. In many cases so far, they are not turned on.
mm,
And there's a debate between the board and management and, around which of these features that are there could be used at the side.
mm,
I'm not saying that I know the answer to that, but at least it's not the lack of access to technology in some cases, it's the willingness to use it, and that should be prudently handled. But there is some productivity gains yet to be had.
mm.
On the very futuristic and topics that most board members don't like to talk about, there are examples of very few companies that have even appointed an AI as a full board member to
Yeah.
have, uh, more even do note takers and sort of like sentiment tracking. Are we talking about the right things? Are we leaving somebody out? But even full voting board members have on a very few, but small companies, not
Yeah.
in the biggest
Probably
countries.
pretty
So
gimmicky at this point, but it's an interesting idea,
it's very
right?
gimmicky,
Yeah.
etc. Right, but the most interesting one I have now, which was an experiment, right, and it was I believe it was INSEAD, and it was published in the Harvard Business Review. They ran a simulated board meeting, and they created a full agentic board with multiple board members, each
Mm,
represented by an agent.
yeah.
And then they had human boards. I think there were two human boards, and they were prepped to do the same board meeting with the
Yeah.
same discussion, etc. And then you had blind sort of not blindfolded, but
Yep.
blind testing a jury of humans
Mm,
that would judge the performance of these different boards
mm,
on a number of, I think it was 7 or 9
yeah.
criteria,
Mm,
and not knowing which board was which.
yeah.
The humans scored the fully agentic automated board higher on every
Mm,
dimension on
mm,
average than the human board.
yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that this means that board members will be replaced by AI, but as board members think about their companies and their employees and the leaders being augmented, and in some cases the roles being fully, that will at some point be a discussion for the board itself. Not today, maybe even not tomorrow, but technically that be it. And that's the far extreme of where I will go on kind of like the use of AI in the
No,
boardroom.
but
But
I think it's the fundamental kind of decomposition that really any employee in any company is facing right now, thinking about what value that I bring is fundamentally something that's uniquely me and my human kind of contribution that I should perhaps double down onto, like my human judgment, my ability to build relationship, build trust, versus what value that I bring do I just bring out of old habit, but should in reality be quite significantly augmented by AI. And I think it's very relevant for the board members to reflect on their own contribution in a similar fashion, right?
No, fully agree. And I mean, if you bring it all back to kind of where we started the journey, when you look at the roles the board have played so far in the 3 years, and the role that the boards will need to play in the next 3 years, which is within the board mandate of most board members today,
Mm.
it's gonna be incredibly important, exciting, and difficult for all the boards to go through this, right? And it's important not only for the company they serve, but you know, for the whole economy, the world, that
Mm.
the boards play this role with so much change, so much opportunity, so much risks. The interaction between the board and management on these topics are going to be absolutely crucial.
Mm.
And having that balance in the boardroom every day, and every board member feeling that they can be at their best, because nobody's an expert on this one, that
Yeah.
we're all learning together, taking the time to think through these aspects without this steady set opinion one way or another. It has never been more important and will continue to be more important. And that's why I think it's a very exciting topic, and one that I'm very grateful that you allowed me to speak a little bit about.
Hey, this has been absolutely fascinating, Per. Hopefully not the last time that we'll meet each other over the podcast format. Thank you so much for coming on today and speaking about the board's evolution in the age of AI.
Thank you.
And there, we're at the end of the episode. I think it's so amazing that almost 70% of you actually listen to the end of the episodes, especially for long format. I'm so thankful for that. Like, the engagement numbers is fantastic. Before we leave each other, two things. First off, this episode was sponsored by Grail, and I'll make no secret about it. Grail is the company that I'm starting. So it's the future of AI, and how can we unlock value that's not just automation, but actually building towards a future that we want to live in, like a future where I want to work, augmentation. So head over to grail.works to know more. Secondly, I'd appreciate so much that you listen to this podcast, but even though 70% listen to the end, almost 70% are not subscribed either. So if you can give a like button, a subscribe to all my channels. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok apparently. We have an awesome webpage. There's so much more content, like yes, the reels and so forth. But what I really would like to push for is that every week I publish a long format article, which is the pinnacle of my thinking. So it's the most interesting thing that I come across that week, either in podcasts or in other endeavors. And I try to write about it towards you, a senior leader. Like, what is the crucial takeaway from the most important part of my week, let's say. I publish that on LinkedIn and on my webpage, thinkroompodcast.com. Thank you so much, and see you next time.